Welcome to the Music Journal podcast, where we talk about the hottest things happening in music right now, and also how you can apply it if you're an aspiring producer or musician yourself. I'm your host, Wes Yee. I'm a producer, artist, and educator, and I'm stoked to be chatting with you. Let's make history. Welcome to another episode of the Music Journal. Today we have Taryn Southern, and Taryn is someone who's been just killing it forever. She was in the top 50 of American Idol's third season. She was the host of a talk show discussing teen issues, which if you're listening and you either are or have been a teenager, you know there's plenty of those. She has a really successful YouTube channel that has over 400,000 subscribers. And I think what I'm most impressed about with Taryn is her ability to adapt and evolve with the market as the sounds and technology change, because now she's actually using artificial intelligence to produce her music. I'm sure we're going to get more into that later in the episode, but Taryn, welcome to the Music Journal.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Totally. Thanks for being here. I gave a really brief synopsis of who you are and what you do. Would you want to fill in some of the gaps, maybe put in your own words?
Sure. I mean, you did a great job. So yeah, I grew up in Wichita, Kansas. I've been in LA for a decade now. So I think I'm officially an Angelino, and music has always kind of been my side hustle / passion. I've never considered it my focus in my career. Always done other things to make a living, like so many musicians out there. And my first real experience as a musician came from American Idol when I was 17 years old. Doing that show was a pretty interesting, exciting, and harrowing experience, and I think it really shaped a lot of how I ended up approaching music, because it was so challenging for me at that time in my life. I was so young, and I had never performed in front of a huge audience, never mind a global stage. And so it was pretty transformative. And I think at the time it felt like a more of a terrifying experience than anything else. But it's the thing that I think me to think about other ways to make music that didn't rely on me needing to perform in front of people. It was just because I had so much stage fright at that time in my life, and the whole experience was so terrifying that I started searching for other ways to make music and other ways to get music out there that didn't require me to show up at a bar and perform live. And that is really how I ended up making music on YouTube and spending, I don't know, like the last 10 years of my life really making music videos. And that just became a core passion of mine. And then eventually that's evolved. And now I'm working with advanced artificial intelligence and other technologies to fuse into my work.
That's wild. Do you still have that fear and that stage fright? Because I feel like once you do it a few times and you got to the top 50, which is obviously pretty far, so you have some experience under your belt, performing on national and international stages. Have you found that you've been able to kind of get over that fear, or do you think it's still something that kind of sticks with you?
It's only shifted dramatically in the last year, which is crazy to say because I've now been singing for over 10 years in studios, and it took that long for me to get over my stage fright. I think I missed a really important element when I was talking through my background. But when I made it to the finals in American Idol, I forgot all of my lyrics.
Oh, really?
In the finals, right? Simon, Paul, and Randy, we were all singing these individual songs that we'd written, and I stood there and I just froze. And at this point in time, I think I had had several rounds of feeling pretty terrible, debilitating stage fright, and I had this fear. So of course I had told Ryan Seacrest in one of my interviews that my greatest fear was forgetting all of the lyrics to a song and not have anything to sing. And then of course that came true. I basically foreshadowed myself.
I feel like if you hadn't said that,
it wouldn't have happened.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're right. I basically sealed my own fate. So that happened. And of course it's like every singer songwriter's worst nightmare when you're a teenager, particularly. It's like these are the experiences that will shape who you are as an artist. And
Totally.
it happened. And this was really my first time on a big stage. And I said, I will never sit live again. And I didn't for another 5 years, but I still loved making music, and I still thought it was worthy to explore making music despite what had happened. I just told myself I'm never getting on a stage again. So that was why I was so focused on how do I make music that doesn't require me to to perform, which is the opposite of how most musicians feel, right? It's like they make music so that they can perform.
I think it depends on the artist. Like I know a lot of people who also really hate performing live, but they make amazing sounding records.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a little more common than you think. I don't think I know anybody else who's just straight up forgotten the lyrics, because that's also my biggest fear. But I find every time I get on the stage, it just somehow works out. So I'm sorry to hear that you had that experience. But out of curiosity, what changed in the last year that kind of made that shift for you?
I'm sure some of it is age and maturity, and there's probably a little bit of just caring a lot less,
Mm,
right? It's like I've had 10 years of a some sort of career
totally.
under my belt where the stakes aren't as high. Like I think at 17, 18, just you've got your whole entire life ahead of you. Anything could happen.
Right, right.
And now it kind of feels like I've had a lot more punches, and I've worked as an actress and a writer and a producer and a director. And so I sort of see the full scope, all sides of what it takes to tell a story, to put on a production, to make something happen. And I think there's just a lot less pressure. So
Mm-hmm.
that's probably part of it. And then the other part of it is just being forced to get back up and do it again. So when I
Yeah.
started making this AI album, which I'm sure we'll get into, and being asked by a lot of technology companies to come and perform, I'm like, well, this is such a great opportunity. I can't pass this up. A lot of it
Right.
was like, come and speak to a group and then perform as well. And I think I've performed now at least once every couple of weeks for the past year and change. And that's, it's forced the EBGBs out of me.
Great use of the word.
I legitimately
By
don't
the
get
way.
nearly as nervous. And I think also it is that fight or flight response. Once you know that your body is actually capable of shutting down and forgetting lyrics to a song that you know in your sleep, then it's almost like you've got this psychosomatic response of terror that
Totally.
it can happen again.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I've
now
witnessed
I've
that
made it.
too.
I've made it like 20 plus shows without forgetting lyrics. So I think I'm good.
Woo! I heard a really cool quote recently. It goes, successful people say yes and figure it out later. So I think whether or not you knew it at 17, you kind of did that. Like you said yes, you agreed to be on the American Idol stage, and you went up there and you did it, and that happened. But at the end of the day, you kind of learned from it and grew, and now you're doing so much better as a result of that. Like, do you regret the experience, do you feel like, or would you take it back if you could?
No, I mean, it's so hard. I honestly don't believe in regret, because
Hmm.
the thing is, even if I had done an amazing job and won American Idol, who knows where I would be now, and if I would have any kind of career, and if how I would have felt about that experience. So at the time, yeah, it was a pretty life changing experience, and by all angles, if I look back on what I went through at 17, it was, like I said, it was pretty harrowing. It was just
Totally.
it was not a fun experience to try and recover from. But I feel that it did change my life for the better. I
Hmm.
don't know that I would have gone down the path that I did. And I've had an amazing decade. Like, it's just been so fun. The fact that we have all these tools now that we didn't have a decade ago is insane. Just even the fact that YouTube was not around
Totally.
really, 11, 12 years ago. It
Yeah.
didn't exist. Or it existed, but it certainly was not being used. And so, like, just the opportunities that have opened themselves up to artists, you don't have to go at your career just from this one direction. And even American Idol at the time, I remember thinking it was such a new thing. I was only in season 3, and it was really the first big talent show
Hmm.
for after I think many years of there not really being a big talent show
Right.
On television that people were excited about and getting behind it. And so it was like an opportunity. It was like the window of opportunity opened up to a lot of people to be discovered and to be seen and to express themselves. And then, and then we have all these other new windows that opened up after that. So I don't have any regrets. I feel like you can only just do your very best. And there are some experiences that no matter how you cut them are pretty terrible at the time. And then later on, if you figure out how to persevere and keep going, beautiful lesson to look at.
Yeah.
I just sounded like a self-help person, but it's
true. There's nothing wrong with that. And I actually agree 100%. I'm about to sound like a fucking self-help personal development person too. But Will Smith says that on the other side of fear are the greatest things in life. So if you're listening right now and you're afraid to do something, be it perform or post a video on YouTube, go for it, because you never know where it's going to lead to. Kind of speaking about technology, like we're talking about YouTube and everything. How'd you get into the whole artificial intelligence thing? Like, how did you decide to take that route for production as opposed to having a producer do it?
Yeah. I mean, I think there were a few different things that contributed to me starting to work with AI, but the main reason was I was getting really into virtual reality and augmented reality.
Oh, no
and just excited about the kinds of things I might be able to make. Because again, like a lot of what I really enjoyed doing over the last 10 years was producing music videos. Like while I enjoy making music, I think I enjoy making music videos even more. So that's why YouTube really spoke to me, because I could the whole thing and it was just so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I got really excited about VR because it was just this new world of content creation. It was new and exciting. And once you've made 1,000 videos, which is like around the number I've made, if not, I think like somewhere between 1,000 and 50 for music videos. I think I've probably made around 75 or something music videos. But, you got to look for new things to challenge yourself with and do. Right. And VR was one of those things. I got really excited about it. So I applied for a grant from Google. They had these like artist grants. I was awarded this grant to make a series of VR music videos. And I wanted to make music videos that explore, how the future would impact content, how the future would impact music. And so I was looking at AI as a tool, the background music for these videos. And I wasn't really thinking about it as I need to explore how these things work, but I didn't believe they could really be legitimate in making great stuff. But I wanted to learn. And so I started playing around with them. And then just after a series of, a few weeks of experimenting, I was like, oh my gosh, this just makes so much sense to me. This speaks a language I get. And so, because I grew up coding. And,
really?
And so I just started taking it a lot more seriously. Yeah. And then within a month, I was like, I have to make an album. Using these tools.
Dope. Taryn, you're a jack of all trades.
Well, master of none. That's the truth.
That's a great Aziz Ansari show too, for those of you who haven't seen it. So I think the question everybody wants to know, and I also kind of had before I read the articles about it and kind of researched you a little bit, is does using AI kind of take the human component out of producing music? I mean, like now I know that the process is you'll have some sort of program that creates the instrumental, right? That's based off of the feel that you're trying to capture, but then you actually go in and you tweak it and edit it, and it doesn't always come out good or the way you want it to. So you still use human being to go in and actually dissect it and then change it into what you want it to be, correct?
Yep. That's a very good layman's terms description of what happens.
What's the actual process like? Because I've never even seen any of these programs that do artificial intelligence producing.
Yeah, well, it's different depending on what program you're using. And I've worked with a handful of programs. Some require more sophisticated coding than others, which require zero. And it depends on also how the neural network is built, whether it's considered a rule-based network or if it's learning based on data that you ingest it with. So all of these things kind of differ. But I think the simplest way to describe it is I'm giving the artificial intelligence network a series of parameters, depending on how it's set up. That could be anything from like the BPM and the key to the style, the tone, the instruments that I want it to use crafting a song. And sometimes I might also ingest it with data, like other musical songs that I want it to learn from to develop a style sheet, as you might say, around.
Oh, that's
and
wild.
then it'll spit out a track for me. And then I can take that track and I can iterate on it. I can basically tell the network, okay, now change. I like the key, I like the instruments, but change the tone or change the style. And I can change all of these individual elements as many times as I want. So by the time you get like, I don't know, 10 iterations in, it doesn't even sound like the same song.
Right.
And then from there, I can download either the stems or the MIDI file, depending on what software I'm using. And then I can edit that. So as anyone knows who's arranged music or produced, the editing part of it is also pretty heavy-handed in terms of like the decisions that you might make. So the only thing, what I would really describe it as is like, I'm like a film editor and the AI is my film. I'm taking all of these individual, I'm like a film editor / director. I'm kind of like telling it what to do. I'm setting up the scene. I'm pressing record on what angles I want. And then I'm taking pieces that I love and I'm arranging them in a way that sounds good to me. So there's still a heavy producing element. The difference is that I'm not actually physically producing the source material. I'm not playing the guitar. I'm not playing the piano. I'm not even like inputting, in Ableton, the
like the data
arrangement of the melodies. Right. Like that's all being gifted to me, but I'm making really heavy editorial decisions that absolutely impact the song. So what you're initially hearing coming out of the AI does end up sounding quite different. Now, some of these software tools are, I think, just better than others and more sophisticated, and what comes out generally is just needs less shape shifting. But either way, you could certainly say that all of the source material is AI driven. So I guess to answer your question, it's not that it's getting rid of production. It's just in the case of using AI, it is changing the role of the. So here's why this is so cool for someone like me. I don't know how to play music. And this was always something, aside from my massive stage fright. I mean, I basically have like two major handicaps as a musician. One is my stage fright, and two is the fact that I can't actually play music. I grew up learning piano, but never really got very good at it. So I would write songs on the piano, but it was just this like painstaking process. I never really understood music theory. It was just really tricky for me. I tried to learn guitar. That was super frustrating. I have tiny little hands. Not that should stop me, because I know tons of people that do, but it was just, I always had a frustrating time trying to learn how to play music. And by the time I got out of college, of course, and then I'm in job world, like the last thing I had time to learn was to play music. And so I always relied on producers to take whatever I was writing with just my vocals, vocal melodies and vocal lyrics, but I could hear the chords, and sometimes I'd like lay out the chords just with my vocals. And it's just very frustrating to kind of have to operate that way.
Right.
And not be able to make a song on my own. Like I felt so restricted. And while I knew that I could probably teach myself how to produce, I just didn't have the time for it. And because I was like always a musician hobbyist and never making real money doing it, it was just not something I had the time and the resources to figure out how to do. And so having this new tool that allows me to do what I do best, which is like working on vocal melodies and lyrics and still crafting a song. I'm very still crafting. I'm making instrumental choices. I'm doing all of that, but in a way that doesn't require me to have the knowledge to actually play. Is pretty exciting because I can actually just make stuff. And that's like, for me, that was the whole point of wanting to do music, was just, I want to be able to sing. I want to be able to make stuff. I want to be able to share my songs with the world. And if I have this huge barrier to entry, which is me finding a music producer that is interested in working with me, that is able to actually get a project done, that, someone that I can either afford to work with or whatever the case may be. In LA, most of the time it's requiring like driving an hour across town in traffic to meet up with somebody. And there's just like, there are a lot of, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not taking away from the experience of two people collaborating, because I think that's an amazing experience, but it's not as easy as sometimes you would like as an artist. And so I was always a little bit jealous of people who could produce and sing and do all of it. And I just thought, man, I would just so love to do that, because that would allow me to really make something when I feel inspired and get it done, and not just have it sit on a shelf or sit on a hard drive hoping to be finished later on. Because that happens so often in the creative process, where we just get stuck because of the barriers that we have.
Totally.
So this one removed all the barriers for me. Yeah.
I think that's wild. I think that that's really cool, because I'm a producer and I talk to a lot of artists, and so many of them tell me like, yeah, I wish I could just make the instrumental that I hear in my head. And I feel like something like AI can actually do that for an artist. And because when you produce as a human being too, it's the exact same process. You start with something and then you change it, you edit it, you write something, you put it on, and then something else changes. So it's kind of the exact same thing. And the way I kind of see it is eventually it might move on to artists working with producers with some sort of artificial intelligence. But I think it's a really cool tool that an artist who doesn't know how to produce can use to actually make a production. I am curious though, do you think there's ever going to be a line where the technology kind of exceeds too far and kind of does start to take away from the human component of making music and actually kind of makes it not as powerful?
I'm sure there will be. I would be naive. It would be naive of me to say otherwise. I mean, I think all of this, we're seeing this across the board with every technology. So music is certainly not the only bastion of like human creativity that we might feel is under, quote unquote, under attack by the AI bots. But like think about just photographers, right? And like how many people now have an iPhone with a crazy megapixel camera and the ability to do depth photography in their hands. Mm-hmm. And that didn't exist before. And you've got all these smartphones with filters and apps, and like what did that do to photography? Well, I think it probably took up a market share that wasn't there before. That has sort of forced a lot of creative photographers to figure out other avenues and other ways to make money or to expand on their business because of that. At least that's what I've heard from a lot of photographer friends of mine. Now everybody thinks they're a photographer. And I think with music that we are going to see something similar. And I do think that being flexible, and the reality is like you stop it. You just can't. Like the technology we're now this global, what do I want to say? I'm like,
it's forever evolving and forever changing.
Yeah, it's forever evolving. It's forever changing. The things that are made in one place don't just get stuck there. It's like we're all connected. And so it's going to happen. And instead of being afraid of it, I think we have to always recognize that every time a new technology comes on the scene, it threatens the status quo. It threatens people who have made a livelihood doing something. And then inevitably we create new exciting things out of the new skill sets that we have. Like we don't usually adopt stuff unless it's useful to us, right? Like we adopt new things because it's useful. And so if it's useful, usually when we adopt those things, then we create new things out of that thing. And so even just from like when movies were invented and the theater was like all up in arms, like this is going to take over the theater. And of course the theater still continued, and it's still going on, and it's changed, and movie making has seen a million and one shifts. And now a lot of filmmakers feel, or even television feel under siege because of the internet and the advent of the internet. And there's just all of these changes that happen, and inevitably music will see the same thing. And I think people who can be flexible and can be open and enjoy learning and are curious and can play with these new tools, we'll probably start to see really interesting new ways to incorporate it or to build on it or to do something different with it that didn't exist before. That will absolutely happen.
Yeah, I think that was really beautifully said. I think a lot of people forget that as a band or an artist, you are essentially an entrepreneur and you're a business person. And the only way to stay in business is to be able to adapt with the market. And at the end of the day, it's all about value, right? So wherever people see the value is where they're going to start to gravitate towards. So um, I don't know if you wanted to talk about this, but before we started recording, Taryn was telling me that she was directing a movie that's kind of on the same lines. It's about like amputees and people with Parkinson's who kind of become quote unquote cyborgs, right?
That's right.
So there are a lot of advantages to these technologies, and it's really amazing. I'm curious where you would draw the line for that as well, though. Like, where would you call a human being a quote unquote cyborg? When at the end of the day, these pieces of technology are allowing them to live normal lives as a human being, you know what I
mean? Yeah, well, the title of the film is I Am Human. Of course, it hasn't been released yet. So, and we explore the future of man and machine. And we explore the future of man and machine through the lens of these 5 patients who are all beautiful human beings who lose a huge sense or source of their humanity because of a disease or because of a disability or something that happened in their life. It was just terrible. And they're looking for that hope. They're looking for that second chance. And then through some of these technologies, you discover that they have new abilities that they might not have otherwise had as humans, quote unquote. And so what do you do with that? And what kind of implications arise as the result of that? So I've been working on this project now for 2 years. And I think it's profoundly changed my own ideas and beliefs about what it means to be human. And I think I have a much more open and flexible view than I did. I suppose, and maybe the way that I feel about it would probably feel shocking to some people, but I think it's interesting even when you ask the question, where do you draw the line? And I guess now my response would be like, do we have to draw a line? Like, who's the arbiter? Who's the arbiter of like lines and like what is?
I am.
Like, how do we even decide like good and bad? And
right.
And yeah, exactly. Good and bad, and what constitute, like, why do we need definitions? Why do humans feel like we need to be sacred about certain things? Is that necessary? And these are all worthwhile questions. Like, I think there is no good answer. For me, I mean, I now feel after seeing some of these people, and obviously a tremendous amount of research has been done to know what's happening in the neuroscience space, what's happening in machine interfaces space. And it's incredible. But like we are incredible biological machines. And we don't think of ourselves like that, but we are biological machines.
Totally.
We have these like complex brains that do all kinds of things, like feel crazy emotions, and we've got hormones running through us and all of these like various parameters. And if you tweak just a few little things, like, if you're injecting someone with hormones, or if you catch a woman at a certain time of the month, like she's going to have a very different internal experience in her brain than not. Like we are these complex machines. Once I realized that so much of our human experience is sort of a complex algorithm of sorts, then I felt a lot less precious about what that experience needs to be. And why we feel like we need to experience pain, or why we need I think like we a lot of times feel the need to justify certain things, like even diseases, right? A lot of people will say, well, it happened for a reason, and well, like, but maybe not. maybe in 10, 15 years, we'll look back and we'll say, it's so sad that people had to go through these terrible, debilitating diseases and now we have these tools that change that. And I think that's a really exciting frontier that we have. We're just at the beginning of being able to explore. But no, I guess like the short answer to your question is like, I'm totally down to be a cyborg.
I think you make a great cyborg, Taryn. That'll be sick.
Oh, thank you. How do you feel about it, Wes?
So forever ago, I did the sound for this documentary, and we interviewed a lot of really inspiring people. And one of the people we interviewed was an MIT professor who was, I believe he was hiking up a mountain or something, and a boulder fell on his legs, and he lost his legs when he was pretty young. Not so young that like the majority of his life was lived without it, so he was able to adapt, but young enough, or old enough rather, that he'd had enough experience having legs that it was really detrimental. And what he did was something I thought was really incredible, is that he ended up researching this and it became his passion. And he actually, I think he was the first person to ever invent legs that connected to the brain, and he could move and he could walk. And I would almost argue that having that happen to him made him more human than if he hadn't been able to create that technology. Because when you think about what a human being is, I picture somebody who, is walking, somebody who has a conscious, whether you believe in a quote unquote soul or whatever. So I think it almost gave him the ability to be a quote unquote regular human being. I hate using that word for that. But at the end of the day, I think it's kind of just a label. And why do you need to have a label attached to being a human being? We got here the same way we were given birth to. We didn't choose to be a human being, but it's just something that is. And I don't think that a label is really necessary for something like that. That got really deep, by the way.
I know it did. I really like your answer. I'll just say one other thing, just because I think what you just said hit it on the nose, which is that ultimately we all just want to feel more human. And I think most people would ascribe positive human experiences to that. Like most people are not going to say to you, I would love to experience more depression, debilitating anxiety. Like most people are just not, even though that is very much an integrated part of the human experience, right? Like we all know what it's like to experience certain terrible, debilitating emotions. And sometimes those things are very necessary,
right?
To teach us lessons, right? We can't like just erase negative human experience. And I don't think that's the point of any of this, but we also, I think, unnecessarily trap ourselves in ways of thinking about who we are, what we're capable of. And we it's so hard to see outside the fishbowl when you're inside of it. And you're just like going about the motions and you're just doing the things that you think you should be doing. And even if they make you miserable, and I just find that seems to be particular states, it feels just like a part of our cultural identity that we do things that make us stressed out, that we don't want to do, that we like, there's this really interesting sort of pandemic of anxiety amongst youth right now. And like, we haven't totally figured out what that is, but we know it's higher and far worse than it's ever been. And we need to figure these things out. But I think a lot of it is just not being able to see outside of our own fishbowls and thinking that we have to narrowly define what our human experience is. And we have every ability to break out of that. And I think that's what makes technology exciting, is because it gives us like another window into that fishbowl and like seeing what are the various things that trap us. I personally find it very freeing whenever I'm having a particularly hard day to think like if I just think, well, none of this is real, or this is just like a series of biochemical reactions happening in my brain, and I don't have to relate to this experience in that way. Like I have every ability to choose what my internal experience is going to be when these things happen. And that is so freeing for me anyway, to feel like I have that kind of control, even when things are out of control.
It reminds me of like the whole Elon Musk thing about how the likelihood of all of this being a simulation is
Uh-huh.
something like, or the likelihood of it not being a simulation is like X number of billions to one.
Uh-huh.
There's a question I ask on this show pretty frequently. I want to answer it for you because I kind of want to see where you go with it. But the
Great.
question is, what's something people wouldn't guess just by looking at you? And if I can answer it for you, feel free to kind of take the reins with it and go with whatever direction you want. But I know that you researched shaman monks or something and studied like ayahuasca somewhere.
Uh-huh. I did. Down in Peru.
Have you tried ayahuasca?
I have. Yeah, I studied my senior thesis. I studied anthropology in college,
Oh, okay. Oh, no way.
right on American Idol. I was like, let's not do anything related to music. So I studied anthropology and went down to Peru for my senior thesis to research ayahuasca. A lot of my professors studied psychedelic or transcendental experiences down in Miami
Cool.
because there was such a South American kind of focus down there. And then when I went down there in college, it was just like this fascinating educational experience. I didn't actually take it while I was, but I met with a bunch of shamans and was pretty deep into learning about it and found it fascinating. And it was, I think, 5 years after my thesis, I actually decided that it was time. I was ready. I was going to do it. I was going to go on this internal track. And I knew exactly what I was signing up for because I had done so much research and had talked to so many people. So it took that long for me to, shall I say, get the, nerves, find the nerves to go through with it.
It's a pretty serious thing to try. So I think I've dabbled in some psychedelics as well. And I think it's definitely important to do the research beforehand. But I think at the same time, uh, words can't really explain the effect it'll have on you. And I think it totally contributes to all your philosophies about technology and the human experience and all of that other stuff that
Mm-hmm.
we somehow segued into. But I'm glad we did.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think it's that whole concept of being able to see from outside the fishbowl, right?
I love the
Um,
fishbowl
you can't see
analogy.
when you're inside of something.
Right.
It's like, but that was my experience, Anaya. I mean, with that, um, with that psychedelic, it's like a rocket ship. You just,
Mm,
you get transported to space and you get to see all of the you basically get to see the makeup of who you are. It's like being able to see the building blocks, the foundational building blocks in your body and your brain of every experience of everything that you relate to, your identity, and you get to look at it from this objective, non-judgmental place of just this is what is. And then you get to have the opportunity, you really get to see how you can change things, how you can tweak the knobs, turn the dials,
mm.
and be the type of human that you really believe you could be, without having had this shitstorm of human experience that we've all been
Right.
through. And I think like that's such that's why it's so empowering for so many people. It's like it's one thing to go to a self-help seminar and kind of like know these things, but then you get right back into your routine, right back into your daily life, and it's so hard to change. And it's another thing to embody, like to fully embody everything that you are, everything that you're made up of, and feel your ability. Like you feel your ability to be able to change and to move the
Mm.
knobs. And it's like, it's so cool. I just
That
like,
sounds
it's
really
so hard to
powerful.
describe for anyone who's never done it, but it can
Right.
be, it can be an incredibly powerful experience. And I'm so happy because I studied this, gosh, it was a while ago, and Aya was, I refer to it as Aya for short, but it was not a popular conversation topic. It was definitely still very controversial. And now
Right.
because of Michael Pollan's new book on psychedelics, and we've got three psychedelics that are in, I think 3 or 4 that are currently in their stage 3 clinical trials at Harvard and MIT. And like these, it's now we're seeing people have a more open dialogue about some of these things. And that's exciting to me. I think they can be really helpful for a lot.
Yeah, the stigma is definitely starting to get lifted. And if you're listening at home and you need an ayahuasca connect, hit up Taryn Southern. That was a joke. Taryn, unfortunately, this is almost our time, but there is one question I ask on every show. I love the answers I get. I would like to know yours. If you had unlimited money, no strings attached, what would you do and why?
Oh, that's such a great, fun question. Especially after we're sitting here talking about the fish bowls and the things that trap people.
I like those kind of
Because I think
conversations.
one thing that traps people is like, if I just hadn't, no, it's great. It's like, because the thing that I think traps most people is when I have enough money, I will blank.
Mm,
Right? It's like
yeah,
such
totally.
the thing that we all assume fixes everything. If I had all the money in the world, oh man, that's such a tough one. I mean, I think like I can certainly answer what I would do just individually to that would bring me a lot of personal fulfillment and happiness, but it would not require all the money in the world. I think it would just I would honestly just focus on making really awesome art. I think most artists know that conundrum that you have between needing to pay the bills and also express yourself, and sometimes those two things get combined in a kind of like a soul sucking manner. If you're having to make a lot of content or art that is not reflective of your sensibilities because it's what pays the bills, and that can be that's I think most artists have to do that. And sometimes that can be a positive experience, sometimes a negative experience. But I would just love to know what it's like to just make art without having to also worry about the financial side of it. And I'm actually hoping that with like things like Patreon and blockchain technologies, like there are more opportunities for artists to be able to just do that, make art. But that would be awesome for me. And then like if I had all the money in the world, I would like to help people. I mean, I think that would being able to make cool art doesn't require all the money in the world. It just requires a little bit. So
I love it. I think you're closer than you think too. I know you have an album on the way out, by the way. Do you want to tell all the listeners where they can find you and maybe give a little more information about that album?
yeah, the album is out September 27th. So I'd love to just, I don't know. You have a great podcast audience. If any of them are interested in checking it out, hearing what AI music is all about, by all means, give it a listen on Spotify or iTunes or wherever, and give me your feedback. Like it's part of the reason I did this whole project was to start a dialogue with other musicians about what this technology means and how we all feel about it and what we can do with it. That's exciting. And so I look forward to hearing people's thoughts.
It sounds like a really cool project, and I'm really excited for it. Taryn, thank you so much for being on the Music Journal.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Music Journal. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you got a lot out of it. If you want to know more about me and what I do, I just put out a personal EP on Spotify. You can go to bit.ly/Wes Yee Spotify. And if you want to know more about music production, I teach an online course about it too. Just shoot an email to wes@homestudiohits.com and I'll send you an application. Just for filling out the application, I'll send you a free sample pack of sounds I use to make the instrumental you're listening to and more. All these links will be available in the show notes, so you can check them out there. And while you're there, if you feel inclined to rate this show 5 stars, that would really help me out. Other than that, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Thanks again. Peace.